The scar on my forearm is from a kitchen knife, not the fox. People always ask about it when they notice me staring at the photograph on my desk, the one with the vixen on the ridgeline, her copper coat catching the last of the daylight. They assume the animal hurt me, they have it backwards. I was hiking the Wilson River Trail in Oregon's Coast Range on a Wednesday afternoon in October, trying to walk off the weight of 10 years photographing crime scenes. Dense forest, moss, thick on the Douglas firs, sword ferns chest high along the trail. I'd spent the morning documenting a child abuse case, bruises measured, angles calculated, evidence collected for people who would argue about it in fluorescent rooms. My hands still smelled like the nitrile gloves I wear for work. I needed the quiet, needed the greenness, needed to remember that the world contained something other than what humans do to each other. That's when I saw the fox. She stood directly in the center of the trail, maybe 30 feet ahead, a red fox, small, 20 pounds at most, with that classic russet coat and black legs. But something was wrong. Her muzzle was dark with blood. Fresh scratches ran across her face, 3 parallel lines that had torn through the fur on her right cheek. One ear was torn, still bleeding. My camera came up, instinctively. Occupational habit. Document everything. But she didn't run. I've photographed wildlife before. Deer bounding away, raccoons scattering, coyotes vanishing like smoke. Wild animals don't stand there when a human approaches. They especially don't maintain eye contact. But this fox looked directly at me, and her amber eyes held something I couldn't name. Not aggression, not fear exactly, though I could see her flanks trembling. She took 3 steps toward me. His legs stopped moving on their own. Every field guide, every nature documentary, every wildlife expert will tell you the same thing. Red foxes avoid human contact. They're shy, skittish, built to disappear. A fox that approaches a human is rabid or habituated to feeding or defending a den site with kits. I scanned for signs: excessive salivation, disorientation, aggression, nothing. Just those eyes locked on mine and that blood on her muzzle. "Hey," I said quietly, "it's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." She sat down, right there in the trail, sat like a dog waiting for a command, her tail curled around her haunches, still watching me. The scratches on her face were deep. Something had fought her, and recently. Within the last few hours, judging by how fresh the blood was. I took 1 step forward, then another. The fox stood and walked 10 feet down the trail, then stopped and looked back over her shoulder. I stopped walking. She sat down again. We stayed like that for maybe 30 seconds, her watching me trying to make sense of what was happening. Then she stood, walked another 10 feet and stopped again. This time, she didn't sit. She just stood there, broadside to me, waiting. "You want me to follow you?" I said out loud. The words sounded ridiculous in the empty forest. The fox's ears swiveled forward. Here's what I knew. I had 3 hours of daylight left. I had a fully charged phone with a downloaded map. I had water, a first aid kit, a headlamp. What I didn't have was any logical explanation for why a wild fox with defensive wounds on her face was behaving like Lassie in a television show. But I've learned something in 10 years of documenting the worst things people do. You can't unsee what you've seen. You can't unfind what you've found. And if there's even a chance that someone or something needs help, you follow the evidence. I took another step forward. The fox immediately moved ahead, maintaining that 10-foot distance, then stopped and looked back. Her body language was clear, deliberate. She wasn't running away, she was leading. "Okay," I said. "Okay, I'm coming." She continued down the trail and I followed, my boots quiet on the soft earth. The forest pressed in on both sides, western red cedar, Sitka spruce, their trunks dark with rain and moss, ferns thick enough to hide anything. The trail here was well maintained, popular with hikers and mountain bikers, but it was a weekday afternoon, and we were alone. Just me and this bleeding fox who'd decided I was supposed to follow her somewhere. After maybe a quarter mile, she stopped and looked back. I stopped too. Then she turned 90 degrees and pushed directly into the undergrowth, off the trail, into the dense tangle of salal and ferns that choked the forest floor. She paused at the forest edge, her head turned back toward me one more time. Waiting. Everything in my training, everything in my experience with wildlife said this was the moment to stop. Don't follow wild animals off trail, don't approach dens or nesting sites, don't interfere with nature. But those scratches on her face weren't from running through blackberry brambles. Something had clawed her, something had made her bleed, and she had come back to the trail to find a human. I pulled out my phone, dropped a waypoint pin on my location, and pushed into the undergrowth after her. The forest off-trail was a different world. Douglas fir seedlings sprouted from nurse logs thick with moss, fallen branches crossed and recrossed like pickup sticks dropped by giants. The undergrowth caught at my pants, scraped my jacket, forced me to move slowly while the fox slipped through it all like water. She kept that same deliberate pace. 10 feet ahead, pause, look back, wait for me to navigate whatever obstacle separated us, then move forward again, never rushing, never losing me. The behavior was so intentional it made my skin prickle. I've documented crime scenes where perpetrators led investigators to bodies, where suspects walked detectives through their actions step by step. This felt uncomfortably similar, that sense of being guided towards something specific, something the guide needed me to see. We'd been moving through the underbrush for maybe 15 minutes when I noticed the blood. Not on the fox, on the vegetation. Small streaks on salal leaves, a smear on a fallen log she'd jumped over. She was still bleeding from those facial wounds, leaving a trail. I stopped and took a photograph. Documentation mode, automatic now, after a decade of crime scene work. The fox stopped and looked back. "I'm coming," I said. She sat down and waited, her tongue lolling slightly, panting, exhausted. I caught up to within 8 feet of her, closer than I'd been since the trail. Close enough to see the wounds clearly. 3 parallel scratches, evenly spaced, claw marks. The torn ear was worse up close, a ragged V-shaped notch taken out of the tip. Blood still welled slowly from the deepest scratch. "What happened to you?" I asked quietly. She stood and moved forward again. Everything in my training said this was impossible. Red foxes are solitary hunters outside of breeding season. They're territorial, yes, but they don't seek out humans for help. They especially don't lead humans on extended journeys through dense forest. The scientific literature was clear on this. Wild foxes avoid human contact except in cases of extreme habituation or rabies. But the fox ahead of me wasn't staggering or disoriented. She wasn't foaming at the mouth. She was moving with purpose, checking constantly to ensure I was still following, adjusting her pace to match mine. The forest began to slope upward, not steep, but steady. My calves burned. The fox climbed without effort, her small body designed for exactly this. I scrambled after her, grabbing vine maple stems for balance, trying not to lose sight of that russet shape ahead. Twice she stopped at fallen logs too high for her to jump and had to detour around them. Each time she waited for me to catch up, making sure I saw which way she'd gone. Once I lost her completely in a dense patch of sword ferns and stood there, breathing hard, scanning the green chaos. A soft sound made me turn. She was sitting 10 feet to my left watching me. When our eyes met, she stood and continued upslope. My phone buzzed. Text from my supervisor. "Need those photos from this morning uploaded ASAP." The child abuse case, the bruises I'd measured and documented. I typed back 2 hours and silenced the phone. The fox had stopped again further upslope, waiting. Here's what I couldn't stop thinking about. The scratches on her face were defensive wounds. I'd photographed enough fights to know the difference. Something had come at her face first, and she'd met it head-on. Whatever she'd fought, she'd stood her ground against it. The question was why? Foxes don't fight unless they're cornered or protecting something. A den with kits, maybe. But it was October, wrong season. Red foxes breed in winter, give birth in spring. By October, any kits would be nearly grown, hunting on their own. There was no biological reason for maternal defense behavior this late in the year. Unless something else was in that den. The slope leveled out onto a small ridge. The fox stopped at the base of a rocky outcrop, partially hidden by a massive fallen cedar, its root ball torn from the earth and leaving a cave-like hollow. She looked back at me one more time, and I saw something in her posture change. The deliberate patience was gone, replaced by tension. Her ears were flat against her skull. She was afraid of what I would think. No, that was projection, anthropomorphism. I caught myself. But she wouldn't move closer to the outcrop, just stood there, halfway between me and whatever she'd brought me to see. I heard it then, a sound so faint I almost missed it under my own breathing and the whisper of wind through the canopy. A cry, thin, weak, unmistakably human. The world tilted. My brain tried to make it something else. A bird, a rabbit caught by a hawk, wind through hollow wood. Anything except what it was. The cry came again, weaker this time, definitely human, definitely infant. I started forward, and the fox moved with me, no longer leading, but flanking, keeping pace 3 feet to my left. Her body language had changed completely. The tension was still there, but underneath it, something else. Relief, maybe. Or as close to it as a wild animal could express. The rocky outcrop extended back into the hillside with several dark openings between the stones. The fallen cedar had created a natural shelter, its massive root ball forming a partial roof. Good den site, protected from weather, multiple escape routes, elevated position. The sound was coming from the largest opening, a gap between 2 moss-covered boulders maybe 2 feet high. I dropped to my knees. The fox sat down, 5 feet away watching. "Hello?" My voice cracked. No answer. Just that thin cry again, weaker now, fading. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, angling it into the gap. The beam caught something pale, fabric, a blanket, torn and dirt-stained. And inside it, his hands were shaking, and he didn't know why. An infant, newborn or close to it. Lying on bare earth inside the den, wrapped in a cotton blanket with cartoon bears on it. The umbilical cord was still attached, clamped with what appeared to be a shoelace, tied in a clumsy knot. The baby's lips were blue. I don't remember crawling into the den. I was just suddenly there, in the dark, dirt under my knees, reaching for the infant with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The baby was cold. Too cold. Hypothermia cold. But when I touched its chest, I felt a heartbeat. Faint, irregular. But there. I pulled the blanket-wrapped bundle against my chest and backed out of the den. The fox hadn't moved. She sat watching as I emerged with the infant, her amber eyes tracking every movement. Up close, I could see she was shivering, exhausted. Those wounds on her face had stopped bleeding, but the torn ear was swollen. The baby made a sound, not a cry, something smaller, a mewl, cat-like and desperate. "Okay," I said, to the baby, to myself, to the fox. My hands knew what to do even though my brain was still catching up. Unzip jacket, pull fleece up. Place infant against bare skin. Zip jacket back up with the baby inside. Skin-to-skin contact. First response for hypothermia in newborns. The baby was so small, maybe 6 pounds, a girl. Cord still attached meant she'd been born recently. Within the last day. The shoelace clamp was amateur, panicked, but it had worked. I pulled out my phone with one hand, the other supporting the infant against my chest. No signal. Too deep in the forest, too low in a fold of terrain. I'd have to get back to the trail. The fox stood up. I looked at her and something passed between us. An understanding. She'd brought me here. Now I had to do the rest. "I've got her," I said. The fox took 3 steps closer. Closer than she'd come since the trail. Close enough that I could have reached out and touched her. Her eyes moved from my face to the bulge in my jacket, then back to my face. She sat down, her tail curled around her haunches, and she watched me with an expression I had no words for. I started back down the slope, moving carefully, one hand supporting the baby through the jacket, the other grabbing branches for balance. Behind me, the soft sound of the fox following, not leading anymore, just following, making sure. The impossibility of it hit me in waves. Red foxes don't adopt human infants. They don't seek out humans for help. Every behavior textbook said what I'd just witnessed couldn't happen, but the baby against my chest was real. The warmth returning to her tiny body was real. And somewhere behind me, a wounded fox was real, following to make sure I didn't fail. My foot caught on a root and I stumbled, catching myself against a tree trunk. The baby stirred, made that tiny mewling sound again, still alive. "Almost there," I whispered. The fox appeared beside me 5 feet to my right, pacing parallel. We moved through the forest together and I realized I was crying. I found the trail by following the waypoint on my phone, stumbling out of the undergrowth onto the packed dirt, like a drowning man breaking the surface. The baby was warmer now against my skin, her tiny heart beating steadier, but still too quiet, still too cold. My phone found a signal. I dialed 911 with trembling fingers, the phone pressed between my shoulder and ear, while both hands supported the infant through my jacket. 911, what's your emergency? I have a newborn infant, abandoned, hypothermic, umbilical cord still attached. I am on the Wilson River Trail, approximately 2 miles from the lower trailhead. Sir, can you confirm? Did you say newborn infant? Yes, found in the forest. She needs immediate medical attention. The dispatcher's voice shifted into a different gear, professional, urgent. Is the baby breathing? Yes, breathing is shallow, body temperature is low. I have her against my skin for warmth. Good, keep doing that. Paramedics are being dispatched to your location. Can you make it to the trailhead? Yes. I'm moving now. I started down the trail at a fast walk, one hand hovering over the bulge in my jacket. The dispatcher stayed on the line, asking questions, giving instructions, keeping me focused. Behind me, the fox emerged from the forest. She stayed off the trail, moving parallel through the undergrowth, visible in flashes between the ferns and salal. Keeping pace. Still following. Sir, are you alone? The dispatcher asked. I looked at the fox. She'd stopped when I stopped, sitting on her haunches maybe 15 feet away watching. Yes, I said, I'm alone. The world tilted because I wasn't alone. I'd been guided here, led through dense forest by a wild animal who had made a choice, an impossible choice, to seek help for something that wasn't her species, wasn't her offspring, wasn't anything evolution had prepared her to care about. Sir? I'm here. I'm moving. The trail descended gradually, switchbacking down toward the valley floor. The baby stirred occasionally against my chest, small movements that felt like prayers being answered. The fox kept pace in the forest beside the trail, a russet shadow flickering between trees. After maybe 20 minutes, I heard the sirens. I came around a bend and saw the ambulance at the trailhead, lights flashing. 2 paramedics were already hiking up the trail toward May. "Here!" I shouted. "I'm here!" They ran the last 50 yards, a woman, maybe 30, and a younger man, both in navy blue uniforms. "Let's see what we've got," the woman said, already pulling out a thermal blanket. I unzipped my jacket carefully. The baby was still wrapped in the torn blanket, pressed against my bare chest. The woman's eyes went wide. "Jesus!" she breathed. "Okay, I've got her." She lifted the infant with practiced hands, wrapping her immediately in the thermal blanket. The younger paramedic was already on the radio, calling ahead to the hospital. The baby cried, a real cry this time, thin but angry. The sound of it broke something in my chest. "That's good," the woman paramedic said. "That's very good. She's fighting." They worked quickly. Portable warming unit, oxygen assessment, the umbilical cord examined and reclamped with proper medical equipment. "Where did you find her?" the woman asked without looking up. "Off trail, maybe half a mile. In a rocky outcrop, a den." "A den?" "Yes." She glanced up at me, her expression sharp. "What kind of den?" I opened my mouth, closed it. How could I explain? How could I tell her that a fox had led me there, that a wild animal with defensive wounds on her face had made a deliberate decision to seek human help? "Fox den?" I said quietly. The paramedic stared at me. "The baby was in a fox den." "Yes." "For how long?" "I don't know. Hours, maybe. Overnight, possibly." She looked back down at the infant. "She should be dead, newborn, exposed. October temperatures dropped to 40 degrees last night. She should absolutely be dead." But she wasn't. They transferred the baby to the gurney, still wrapped in warming blankets, still crying that thin, furious cry, the sound of life insisting on itself. "We need to get her to the hospital," the woman said. "You'll need to come too. Police will want a statement." Of course. They started down the trail, moving fast, but careful with the gurney between them. I followed, my legs mechanical, my mind somewhere else entirely. At the edge of the trailhead, I turned back. The fox stood at the forest edge, barely visible in the shadows between trees. We looked at each other across 50 feet of space that felt like 50,000 years of evolution. She'd done everything she could, kept the baby warm through a freezing night, fought off whatever had tried to get at it. Then found a human who could do what she couldn't. I raised my hand, not a wave, an acknowledgement. The fox turned and disappeared into the forest. The hospital was chaos wrapped in fluorescent lighting. Doctors, nurses, social workers, police officers, everyone moving with purpose, while I sat in a plastic chair in the emergency department, still wearing my hiking boots, dirt under my fingernails, my jacket still unzipped from where they'd taken the baby. A detective arrived within the hour. Older man, grey at the temples, tired eyes that had seen too much, like looking in a mirror. "Mr. Chen, I'm Detective Harlow. I need to ask you some questions about how you found the infant." "Of course." He sat down beside me, pulled out a notebook. Old school. I respected that. "Walk me through it, from the beginning." So I did. The trail, the fox, the blood on her muzzle, how she'd led me off-trail through dense forest to the den, how the baby had been wrapped in a blanket with cartoon bears, umbilical cord still attached, lips blue from cold. Harlow wrote it all down without comment. When I finished, he looked up. "You said a fox led you there?" "Yes." "A wild fox?" "Yes." His mind refused what his eyes saw. "Mr. Chen, I've been doing this 23 years. I need you to understand. When we investigate abandoned infant cases, the story matters, every detail. So I'm going to ask you again, how did you find the baby?" I met his eyes. A red fox with defensive wounds on her face led me approximately half a mile off the Wilson River Trail to a den site in a rocky outcrop, The infant was inside that den. He stared at me for a long moment, then wrote it down exactly as I'd said it. "The baby's alive," he said quietly. "That's what matters. The doctors say another few hours of exposure, and we'd be having a very different conversation." "How is she?" "Stable. Body temperature's coming up. No signs of frostbite, no serious injuries." He paused. "It's remarkable, actually. Newborns exposed to overnight temperatures in the low 40s typically don't survive. Hypothermia sets in fast, but this baby's core temperature never dropped below critical levels." "She was kept warm," I said. "By what?" I didn't answer. Harlow flipped through his notebook. "The blanket you described, we've got it. Torn, you said. Dirt-stained. We'll process it for DNA, trace evidence." The umbilical cord was clamped with a shoelace. White cotton, generic brand. That tells us panic. Someone who didn't have medical supplies, didn't plan ahead. "The mother," I said. "Most likely. Abandoned infant cases, it's usually the mother. Young, scared, doesn't know what to do. We'll find her." His voice softened. "We always do. DNA evidence makes it almost certain now." A nurse approached. "Detective, the baby's stable enough for photographs if you need them." "Thank you. Mr. Chen, I'll need you to come with me. We need to document everything for the investigation." I followed them down a corridor to the neonatal intensive care unit. Through a window I could see the baby in a warming bassinet, wrapped in white hospital blankets, tiny chest rising and falling, alive, fighting. "Mr. Chen is a crime scene photographer," Harlow told the nurse. "He knows the protocol." I did. I'd photographed hundreds of scenes, documented evidence, measured wounds, captured angles and distances. This should have been routine, but my hands were shaking. The nurse let us into the unit. Up close, the baby looked impossibly fragile, maybe 6 pounds. Perfect fingers, perfect toes, a shock of dark hair. She was sleeping, her face peaceful. "We need photographs of the umbilical cord site," Harlow said. "Any marks or injuries, and the blanket she was wrapped in." I pulled out my camera, adjusted the settings, focused. Click. The umbilical cord, professionally clamped now, the shoelace removed and bagged as evidence. Click. Her tiny hands, no injuries visible. Click. The torn blanket with cartoon bears laid out on a sterile table, dirt stains documented. Each photograph another piece of evidence in a case that would eventually lead to an arrest. A teenage girl, probably, terrified, desperate, who'd given birth alone and made the worst decision of her life. "The den site," Harlow said. "We'll need to process that too. Can you take us there?" "Yes." "Good. We'll go at first light tomorrow. I want to see where this happened." He paused, studying me. "You did good work today, Mr. Chen. You saved this baby's life." "But I didn't." "Not really. I was just the one who could carry her out." We returned to the den site at dawn. Detective Harlow, 2 forensic technicians, a wildlife officer from the State Department, and me. The forest looked different in morning light, softer, less ominous. But my chest tightened as we approached the rocky outcrop. "Here," I said, stopping at the base of the fallen cedar. "The den entrance is between those 2 boulders." The forensic team moved in with their equipment, cameras, evidence markers, collection kits. They worked methodically, documenting everything before touching anything. I recognized the rhythm. I'd done this hundreds of times. One of the techs crouched at the den entrance with a flashlight. "Got fibers here. Looks like the blanket material. An animal fur, reddish, probably fox." The wildlife officer, a woman in her 50s named Santos, knelt beside him. "Red fox den, definitely. Size and location are typical, but this is interesting." "What?" Harlow asked. "The den's been modified recently." She pointed to scratch marks on the entrance stones. "Fresh excavation. Foxes will enlarge dens for spring litters, but it's October. Wrong season." She crawled part-way into the den, her flashlight beam sweeping the interior. When she emerged, her expression was troubled. The deepest part of the den, where a fox would normally keep kits protected, that's where the baby was placed. Something deliberately put the infant in the safest part of the den. I'd photographed 100 crime scenes, but this... The forensic team continued working. They found more fibers from the blanket, footprints in the soft earth near the entrance, human, adult-sized, running shoes, probably female based on size, the mother, most likely, running away. Then one of the techs called out, "Detective, you need to see this." We gathered around him. He was photographing something on a flat stone near the den entrance. Scratches, deep gouges in the moss-covered surface. "These are fresh," the tech said, "within the last 24 to 48 hours. Santos examined them closely. Claw marks, 2 different patterns." She pulled out a reference guide, compared the marks. "These larger ones, 4 parallel lines, wide spacing. That's corvid, crow or raven, and these smaller clusters, 3 toes, close spacing. Mammalian, probably raccoon or possibly coyote." Harlow's face had gone still. "They came for the baby. Or they were investigating unusual sounds and scents," Santos said carefully. "But yes, they approached the den." "And something stopped them," I said quietly. The tech moved his light across the stone. More scratches, defensive patterns, signs of a struggle. Santos stood and walked a slow circle around the den entrance, studying the ground. She stopped, crouched, took photographs. "Blood," she said. "Not much. Droplets here, here and here, leading away from the den toward the trail." She looked at me. "You said the fox that led you here had wounds on her face?" "Yes, 3 parallel scratches across her muzzle, 1 torn ear." "Defensive wounds," Santos said. "From fighting something off." She paused. "From protecting something." The forest was quiet around us, just the soft sound of cameras clicking as the forensic team documented everything. "Let me get this straight," Harlow said slowly. "You're telling me a fox kept a human infant warm overnight in her den, fought off scavengers, then went looking for help?" Santos met his eyes. "I'm telling you, the physical evidence is consistent with that sequence of events. What the fox was thinking or why, that's not something I can document. But we all knew what the evidence said. The techs finished processing the scene, bagged the fibers, the soil samples, the photographs of claw marks and blood droplets. Everything that would become evidence in a criminal case. Everything that would help convict the mother who'd abandoned her newborn to die. Except the baby hadn't died. As we hiked back to the trailhead, I looked for the fox. Scanned the underbrush, searched the shadows between trees. Nothing. She was gone. Santos walked beside me. "In 20 years of wildlife management, I've never seen anything like this," she said quietly. "The behavior is unprecedented. No case file could contain this." "Will you report it?" "I'll document what the evidence shows, what anyone chooses to believe." She shrugged. "That's not my job." At the trailhead, Harlow shook my hand. "We'll be in touch. You'll need to testify when we find the mother." "I will." I drove home in silence. My camera sat on the passenger seat, full of photographs I'd taken at the hospital. Evidence for a case. Proof of what happened. But the only photograph that mattered was still on my phone. The one I'd taken on the trail yesterday. The fox, sitting in the path, looking back at me. Those amber eyes holding something I still couldn't name. The arrest came 3 days later. Harlow called me at work. "We found her. DNA match through the state database, 17 years old, lives with her parents about 15 miles from the trailhead." She confessed. What did she say? Said she didn't know she was pregnant until she went into labor. Gave birth in her bedroom while her parents were at work. Panicked. Drove to the forest, left the baby in the first sheltered spot she could find. Thought nature would take care of it quickly. My hand tightened on the phone. She left her to die. Yes, but that baby should have died in under 2 hours from exposure. Newborns can't regulate their body temperature. October night, temperatures in the low 40s. But when you found her, she'd been out there for almost 20 hours. 20 hours, I repeated. The medical examiner reviewed the evidence, the baby's core temperature, the rate of recovery, the absence of frostbite. He says something kept her warm, consistently, throughout the night. I closed my eyes and saw the fox, her body curved around the infant in the den. The wildlife officer's report is in the case file, Harlow continued. Santos documented everything. The modified den, the defensive wounds, the evidence of scavengers fought off. And it doesn't make sense. Not scientifically. Red. Foxes don't adopt human infants. They don't seek out humans to help solve problems. Santos included 3 peer-reviewed papers on vulpine behavior in her report. None of them have documented anything remotely similar. The numbers didn't add up to anything that made sense. But the physical evidence is undeniable, he said. So we're documenting it. It'll be part of the trial. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the timeline. The mother giving birth, panicking, driving to the forest with her newborn daughter wrapped in a blanket with cartoon bears, placing the baby inside the den, opening and running. And then the fox, finding the infant, making a choice, because that's what it was, a choice, not instinct, not maternal drive. The baby was human, wrong scent, wrong size, wrong everything. Evolution had not prepared a red fox to care about a human infant's survival, but this fox had cared. She'd moved the baby deeper into the den to the safest spot. She'd kept it warm through a freezing night. When scavengers came, crows, raccoons, maybe a coyote, she'd fought them off. The scratches on her face were proof. And then in the morning, she'd gone looking for help. That was the part I couldn't stop thinking about. The deliberate decision to seek out a human, to lead me back to the den. She'd known she couldn't save the baby alone. She'd known I could. If you also believe in the extraordinary, this is where real stories live, the ones that make you question what animals truly understand. Subscribe to the channel. 2 weeks later, I received a package at my office. No return address. Inside was a wildlife camera photo, time-stamped from the night the baby was abandoned. The motion-activated camera had been mounted on a nearby trail, part of a routine wildlife survey. The image showed the fox carrying something in her mouth, the corner of a blanket, moving toward the den. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. Someone had witnessed it, not a human, just a camera in the darkness, recording what shouldn't be possible. I had the image analyzed, not enhanced or altered. Genuine. The fox in the photograph matched the one I'd followed. Same tear in the ear, visible even in the infrared image. I put the photograph in a frame on my desk, next to the one of the fox on the ridgeline. 2 pieces of evidence that the impossible had happened. The case file grew thicker. Statements, lab results, medical reports, all of it building toward a trial. But buried in the appendices was Santos's wildlife report. 17 pages of behavioral analysis, forensic evidence, and a conclusion that read, "The observed behavior falls outside documented parameters for Vulpes vulpes. Further study required." Further study required. As if you could study this. As if you could put what happened into a scientific framework and extract meaning from it. The fox had made a choice that no textbook could explain. She'd protected a human infant at a cost to herself, fought off predators, and sought help when she couldn't provide what was needed. She'd shown me something I'd spent 10 years trying to forget: that mercy exists, that compassion crosses species boundaries, that the world contains more than cruelty. The trial was set for January. I would testify. Tell the jury what I'd seen. Show them the photographs. The evidence would speak. The mother would likely face charges: child endangerment, attempted manslaughter. The baby, now in foster care, was thriving. 6 pounds at birth, already 8 pounds at her 1-month checkup. The doctors called her resilient, a fighter. They didn't know the half of it. 3 weeks after finding the baby, I went back to the forest. Not to the den, I couldn't face that yet, just to the trail. The same trail where the fox had first appeared. I told myself I was hiking, clearing my head, getting exercise, but I was looking for her. The forest was quiet. Late October had given way to November. The undergrowth was thinner, the ferns browning, the moss darker with constant rain. I walked slowly, scanning the shadows, watching for any flash of russet fur. Nothing. I'd reached the spot where she'd first blocked my path when I saw it. Fresh fox tracks in the mud beside the trail, small, delicate, leading off into the undergrowth in the exact direction we'd travelled together. I followed them, off-trail, through sword ferns and salal, up the gradual slope toward the rocky outcrop. My heart was pounding. The tracks were clear in the soft earth, easy to follow. She'd passed this way recently, within the last few hours. The outcrop came into view through the trees, the fallen cedar, the moss-covered boulders, the den entrance, dark and silent, and sitting on the flat stone where the forensic team had found the claw marks, the fox. She looked thinner. The torn ear had healed but remained notched. The scratches on her muzzle had scabbed over, leaving pale lines through the russet fur. She watched me approach with those amber eyes, and I stopped 10 feet away. We looked at each other across the distance. "It's you," I said quietly. She didn't move, just sat there, tail curled around her haunches, watching me with an expression I finally had words for. Recognition. She knew me. Knew I was the human she'd led here, the one who'd taken the baby, the one who'd finished what she'd started. I lowered myself slowly to the ground, sitting cross-legged on the damp earth, non-threatening, patient, giving her space. She tilted her head slightly, studied me. "The baby's alive," I told her. "She's going to be okay, because of you." The fox's ears swiveled forward. I pulled out my phone and found the photograph. The baby in the warming bassinet, eyes open, healthy and pink and crying. I held the phone out, knowing it was ridiculous, knowing she couldn't possibly understand what a photograph was. But she looked at it, actually looked at the screen, her head moving slightly as she focused. Then she looked back at me, and I understood. She hadn't come back to the den to live here. The den was empty. I could see that now. No fresh excavation, no scent markers, no signs of current occupation. She'd come back to this place for the same reason I had, to remember what happened here, to bear witness to the impossible thing we'd done together. The scientific literature had no framework for this. Behavioral ecologists could document tool use, problem-solving, even rudimentary cooperation between species. But this, a wild animal making a moral choice to protect a creature from a different species at significant cost to itself with no evolutionary advantage, this fell outside every parameter. Santos was right. Further study required. But some things couldn't be studied. Some things could only be witnessed. I thought about the timeline. The mother abandoning the baby around 9 p.m. based on cell phone records. the wildlife camera capturing the fox at 11:47 p.m. carrying the blanket toward the den, meaning the baby had been alone, exposed, crying in the darkness for nearly 3 hours before the fox found her. 3 hours. Long enough for hypothermia to set in. Long enough for the baby's body temperature to drop toward critical levels. Long enough for a newborn to die. But the fox had found her, and then this was the part that made my chest tight. The fox had to have understood what the baby needed: warmth, protection. The den was modified, Santos had said, enlarged. That took time. The fox had excavated the chamber specifically to fit the infant, had positioned the baby in the safest, most protected spot, had curled her own body around the child the way she would around her own kits, for hours, all night, while her own body heat transferred to the infant, keeping core temperature just high enough to sustain life. And when the scavengers came, attracted by the sound of crying, the scent of blood from the umbilical cord, she'd met them. A 20-pound fox against crows, raccoons, possibly a coyote. She should have been killed, should have been driven off. But those defensive wounds on her face told the story. She'd fought, she'd won, she'd protected what she'd decided was worth protecting. Then, as dawn broke and the baby's cries grew weaker, she'd made another choice, the hardest one. She'd left the den, left the infant alone and vulnerable to seek help, had found the trail, had waited for a human, had led me back through half a mile of dense forest, checking constantly to ensure I followed. She'd performed a calculus no evolutionary biology could explain. She'd weighed outcomes, assessed capabilities, made strategic decisions based on projected future events. She'd hoped, that's what it was, hope, the belief that I would follow, that I would understand, that I could do what she couldn't. A fox had hoped, had trusted, had saved a life by believing in cross-species cooperation that shouldn't exist. I was crying again. Sitting in the November forest, tears running down my face, while a wild fox watched me from 10 feet away. "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you for what you did." The fox stood, looked at me one last time, then turned and disappeared into the undergrowth, moving silent as smoke through the ferns. I sat there for a long time after she'd gone, the forest darkening around me, the air growing cold, trying to hold on to something I knew I'd never fully understand. The trial happened in February, cold rain streaking the courthouse windows. I testified for 90 minutes, showed the photographs, described finding the baby. The defense attorney asked if I was certain about what I'd seen, if perhaps I'd misinterpreted the fox's behavior, if maybe the infant had simply been lucky. "No," I said, "not lucky, protected." The jury deliberated for 6 hours, found the mother guilty of child endangerment and abandonment. She was 17. She cried throughout the sentencing. The judge gave her probation, mandatory counseling, supervised visitation rights once she turned 18. Merciful, considering. The baby was adopted by a family in Portland. They named her Grace. I received one photograph, her first birthday. Smiling, healthy, surrounded by people who loved her, who would never abandon her. I keep that photograph on my desk next to the two of the fox. People ask about them sometimes, colleagues, friends. They see the baby and smile. They see the fox and ask if it's my pet, if I do wildlife photography as a hobby. "No," I tell them, "she's wild." Then they ask why I have her photograph, twice. The one on the trail looking back over her shoulder. The one on the ridgeline at sunset, watching as paramedics took the baby away. I never know how to answer. Because how do you explain that a wild animal changed everything you thought you understood about the world? How do you tell people that mercy isn't uniquely human, that compassion can cross the unbridgeable gap between species, that a fox made a choice that most humans wouldn't make, to sacrifice her own safety for a creature that gave her nothing in return. I still photograph crime scenes, still document what humans do to each other, the bruises, the blood, the evidence of cruelty that needs to be measured and catalogued. It's necessary work, important work, but it's not the only work the world does. 6 months after the trial, I was hiking the Wilson River Trail again. Different season, spring now, the forest green and alive. I wasn't looking for the fox, wasn't expecting anything, just walking, breathing, remembering. I came around a bend and stopped. 3 fox kits were playing in a sunny patch beside the trail. Tiny things, maybe 8 weeks old, all rust-colored fur and oversized ears. They tumbled over each other, practicing hunting pounces. One of them saw me and froze, then darted into the underbrush. The other 2 followed. And then from deeper in the forest I heard it, a sharp bark, a warning call, the vixen telling her kits to stay hidden, stay safe. I didn't see her, didn't need to, but I knew she'd survived, had found a mate, had raised a new litter, had continued the impossible work of being alive in a world that tries constantly to kill you. The wounds on her face would be scars now, the torn ear would remain notched forever. But she was here, still fighting, still surviving, still making choices that mattered. I stood there listening to the forest sounds, birds, wind, the distant rush of the river, thinking about all the stories I'd never document, all the moments of grace that happen in the darkness when no camera is watching, all the times animals make decisions that science can't explain and humans can't witness. The world is full of them, has to be, because if one fox could save one human infant, how many other impossible acts of mercy happen every day? How many times does the natural world choose kindness over survival? I don't have answers, just questions. And 2 photographs of a fox who taught me that the line between human and animal, between instinct and choice, between what should be possible and what actually happens, that line is thinner than we think. I testified at a trial, helped convict a mother who abandoned her baby. The evidence was clear, the law was clear, justice was served, but I also witnessed something else, something the courtroom couldn't contain and the case file couldn't document. I witnessed a wild animal look at a dying infant and decide that life mattered more than safety, that mercy was worth the cost. I can't explain it, can't rationalize it, can't fit it into any framework that makes scientific sense. I can only tell you what I saw. And if you've ever witnessed something similar, a moment when an animal showed wisdom or compassion that seemed impossible, I'd like to hear about it, because these stories matter. They remind us that the world contains more than what we document in crime scenes and case files. They remind us that grace exists, that mercy crosses boundaries we thought were absolute, that sometimes in the darkness, when a newborn baby is dying alone, a fox will decide that life is worth protecting, even when it shouldn't be possible, even when it makes no sense, even when. The photograph on my desk, the one of her on the ridgeline, catches her in perfect profile. Ears forward, eyes alert, body tense with awareness. She's watching the paramedics carry the baby down the trail, making sure, confirming that I'd done what she'd trusted me to do. People see that photograph and think it's beautiful, artistic, a nice nature shot. They don't know they're looking at proof that the impossible happens, that animals understand more than we give them credit for, that mercy isn't learned, it's chosen. The fox made her choice in a den in the Oregon forest. And I'm still trying to understand what that means,